Welcome to the Crown Square Podcast. Kevin Stewart alongside Reggie Walker. We're talking ball this week with our guest who played college football at UCLA, 4 years with the Indianapolis Colts. He's a Sirius XM college football analyst, the host of Chopping It Up with Buck, Charles Buck Arbuckle. Mr. Arbuckle, thank you for coming on with us this week.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. I'm having some technical difficulties, so, we all making it work, right?
Hey, man, as long as we can see you and hear you, we're good. But we're starting to return to a little bit of normalcy this week. We had fans pack Bank of America Stadium with Fan Fest on Friday night. The Panthers have a game this Sunday in Indianapolis. What's the feel personally for a player and a team as you're getting ready for your first preseason game and you're getting ready to hit people for real this week?
Yeah, I would say I think it really depends on where you are on the roster. If you're a vet, you kind of know what you have to do and what you're working up to. If you're not a veteran and you're really trying to make the club, I think every single opportunity you get, you have to make the most of it. And I think that's the part for me, just remembering where I was versus my first year as a rookie to year 2, 3, or 4, or 5, wherever you are. And I think that's really the key. There's a lot of influx of talent here with the Panthers, and there's going to be some guys that are trying to make the club. And then there are other guys on the other ends of the spectrum that probably feel more comfortable. But you never know. When you're a team that hasn't played particularly well and you're looking to improve that record, they're going to tell you every position is open. Well, we know that's not the case. There's some guys that are going to come back, and Christian McCaffrey is one just right off the rip that we know is not too concerned about his job, right? But a guy like Sam Darnold, who's trying to come to a new team who we all feel will be the starter, but he has to now show it to a group of guys that don't really know him. They haven't played with him. So there's a whole lot of that's going on this week as you start your first preseason game. And then, oh, by the way, the practices that are joint practices, you have now a chance to go against guys you haven't been seeing. So all that stuff you were doing in practice, you're going to have to up your game because you got to do that in practice and in the game where you're going to participate against those guys.
And Buck, and to that point, I want to throw this out there and kind of get your take on this as well, right? And as you know, in training camp and in fall camp and all that stuff, a lot of stuff is controlled. It's situational, right? So when a blitz period is coming, when you're going to do inside run, all these different things, and coaches know what they want to do with their defense against certain things from the offense. All of a sudden, to that point, you're playing that first preseason game where you're doing those joint practices. It's not controlled like that. Yeah. Whatever is coming is just coming from the other side. And this is where, right, the true set of film starts to come together and coaches can figure out what they have.
Yeah, I agree with you, Reggie. I think that's where if you just think about this team, we've talked about them needing to improve at the tackle position. So how's Cam Irvin going to handle that? Greg Little, who also is listed as a tackle, along with Brady Christensen, but also the right tackle, Taylor Mouton and, Trent Scott, all those names that we'll see kind of shake out because it's so hard. You don't know who's going to be healthy, who's not. I think there's some change on the interior of the line. So I think what I always look at is a trench play because on the outside, you generally know, okay, you can watch a guy and say, hey, are they going to be good? I think one guy that's really stepped up in camp so far, you're hearing a lot about is Terrence Marshall. He's played particularly well. If you look at the tight end position, Dan Arnold, who can stretch the field. I don't think the Panthers have had that at the tight end position since Greg Olsen has left. So I just look at those two positions right away. But if I'm looking at defensively, Reggie, I think you're right. There's always a thud, and I'm going to come and tap you with two hands. Now it's about let's bring it downhill and let's be physical. What kind of physicality can you have if you're Davion Nixon, who has been talked a lot about, along with Derek Brown? That interior, to me, I really want to see what the interior defensive line looks like, and I really want to see what the offensive line looks like because I know the Panthers have skill weapon guys. I don't worry about that. I worry about what they're going to look like in the trenches. And in particular, some of these new folks that haven't been with this team and who now are going to play a role. Is Ian Thomas going to be the guy that can make it go? Is Tommy Tremble going to step up? I mean, there's a lot of things. I think they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel in certain instances to have matchup problems, but you got some really quality receivers that can play. And then, oh, by the way, on this other side, how's your secondary going to hold up? So all those things, when you get live bullets and you're blitzing and coming, that's where we'll see if guys have the right football IQ and makeup to make plays.
And to that point, I'm going to ask you this real quick. It's kind of a two-part question. Number one, not to put too much heat on them, but if you look at the NFC South in particular, the division, Drew Brees just retired, Matt Ryan's late 30s. Tom Brady, even though he's on his Benjamin Button right now, you would think he's probably done in the next couple of years. How important is it, number one, that Sam Darnold is the right answer? And number two, how important is it going to be that Dan Arnold, right, and or Ian Thomas can be factors to help Sam Darnold be the right answer?
I think they're critical because I know what I'm getting on the outside. I know these guys that have played well, whether it's DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson. I mean, you and I talked a lot about it over the last few years. The tight end position, since Greg Olsen has left, has not been the same. And even at the latter years when he was getting hurt, the position has not given it they haven't given any quarterback that's back there the luxury of having that security blanket. You bring a Dan Arnold over, he was a matchup nightmare in Arizona because of his height and, his 240-pound frame. Not a great inline blocker, but I don't think they really care so much about that. He now creates a big body in the middle of the field that they don't really necessarily have other than Terrence Marshall, from my perspective, from a receivers. They don't have big, thick receivers, but they have guys that can go down the field and make plays. So you now have to use a tight end as that big body, a guy that can make plays for you in the middle of the field or on 3rd and 5 when you just need a quick right there. You got it, 10 yards, you're moving the chains. And I think that's been the problem for the Panthers the last year or more. But I also think, too, how do they hold up against a Colts defense that I think has gotten a lot better? You're going to see a lot of young players. So the ones will get some time, but it's going to be really critical for them to develop that in a game setting as opposed to what they've been doing in practice and even controlled scrimmages, which aren't the same, even though you're practicing against a ball club.
Buck, I agree with you about the offensive line and interior defensive line. I also want to see how Denzel Perryman kind of comes over and handles the middle linebacker position, because without Luke Kuechly last year, that was kind of a gaping hole they had. The secondary, I'm not really worried about, but where do you think this Panthers team kind of stacks up currently with the rest of the NFC? We've had Kevin Carter on here. He thinks it's going to be another rebuilding year for the team, but where do you think the Panthers may stack up with the rest of the NFC going into 2021?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Kevin on that. I think the one thing that I think can be different is if that interior defensive line and, to your point, Denzel Perryman can make plays for you, along with a guy like Patty Fisher, who I've heard has had a pretty good camp as well. But it's so hard to say from that perspective. I know what Shaq Thompson brings every time I watch film. The other guy that I'm curious to see is, now that he might be a little bit bigger but understands after playing such a pivotal role, is Brian Burns. I think that's going to play a key factor. And then you've got another guy that's come over, and I like what I think all good coaches will do this. You'll go back to your well of college players. Hassan Reddick is going to be a key name at the Sam position, because I think if you're going to have a linebacker that can hold the point and do some different things and match up well, he'll have to have a pretty significant role in this defense. And I've heard him talking about goal line. I've heard, when you watch film on him over the last couple of years, he's played well, but it's going to be interesting to see how he morphs and plays in this defense and adjusts to the Panthers culture.
And to that point, I look at a guy like Brian Burns, and one of the things that, and you and I talked about this right years ago with Jadeveon Clowney. I remember saying to you, I don't like the Clowney fit with the Texans because they run a 3-4 and they want him dropping into coverage a lot. We saw Burns in coverage often last year. How important is it that they give him an opportunity to really come off the edge 95% of the time instead of dropping into coverage 30% of the time?
Hey, Reg, I'll say this. I was pleasantly surprised with how well he could do that, even though that wasn't his forte. So that gives you now that extra element. But I do think if they want to run, which I think is more their style, a 4-3 front. I know Phil is, Snow is saying he's going to be multiple, and you are. I mean, in the NFL, you have to play 3-4 sometimes. But if their base is 4-3, then that gives Brian Burns a chance to, really get off the edge. But I think Gross Matos also is a guy. We talk so much about Brian Burns, but the kid on the other side from Penn State, he really played well, and I think exceeded some expectations. And I'm really looking forward to watching him play as well, because I think you're going to need that. You're going to need that flexibility of being able to flip guys, making sure guys can come off the edge, and really do a nice job with the training camp under your belt. But I think this is a situation where you have a couple of key players that maybe the league doesn't know about. But I think we've been able to watch them grow up and kind of learn and play. And I'm interested to see how that's going to progress this year for the Panthers.
Well, I was just switching to college football here real quick. There was a rumor last week on social media, and I didn't really buy it, that Clemson and Florida State are going to move to the SEC. I don't know if it has any merit or whatever. I don't understand it. But if you're Clemson and you own the ACC, that is your conference. Why would you leave for the SEC when you're going to go play against Alabama and Georgia and Auburn? And what would be the incentive of doing that?
Yeah, I think we're learning the Louisiana Purchase done backwards is what's happening with all this. I mean, we got, are we going to sell it back to France, or I don't know. But here's what I think. The SEC is playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. When I saw this announced, and when I saw Texas and Oklahoma, I was like, that's a slap in the face to A&M, but it's also two long-established programs that one was in the Southwest Conference, one was in the Big 8, and then they morphed and joined the Big 12. They've recruited against each other. They don't really necessarily like each other. Nope. But I think the hate is deeper between A&M and Texas. And Oklahoma's like, well, look, if we can go somewhere where we can only get stronger in our Texas roots, which they like to recruit 50 to 60 players every single year on their roster or from the state of Texas. When they win, they get Texas kids. But now you're going to have the encroachment of all these other powerful schools that should use that to their advantage, and the way that Alabama has been doing for years. Nick Saban has been getting down there. A&M has used, they've gotten better quality players than those Big 12 years when A&M was there. So I think, to think about it, the ACC is in a much better position. Florida State, if you're an ACC fan, or an ACC, if you live in the ACC country, Florida State has to get better, and Miami has to be consistent. I don't care. I love the turnover chain. I love all that, but I want to see you play better football. And until you do that, there's going to be a little bit of thought that the ACC isn't as strong. And I think that's going to be the critical piece if they can grow, and then maybe the ACC becomes a place where teams are looking to go. Mm-hmm. I know the Big Ten has to make some moves. I know the Pac-12 has said they want to kind of wait back and see. But I'll tell you this, Greg Sankey is playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers.
Buck, I think, and this is, I'm just going to ask you flat out. I know we're not supposed to do this when we're interviewing people, but I'm getting ready to basically ask a yes or no. I think this is the beginning of the break off from the Power Five, if you will, to being their own. Yeah. And Greg Sankey's going to be the Mark Emmert of that, the commissioner. Do you see that as part of the future? Do you agree with that at all?
It's pretty easy to see it. I mean, he's the guy that's been in all of those meetings and been able to kind of work behind the scenes and do things that you think, wow, how's he able to pull that off? He's been involved in every single discussion. The SEC is considered the most powerful brand now that you brought Texas and Oklahoma over. So here's the beautiful thing about this. Each of these schools have said we want to get, or these conferences have talked about super conferences, right? The Pac-16, which it should have been if it was Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, and Texas A&M, never came to be. I think in 2010, maybe 11.
Something like that.
Ever since then, we have seen a lot of movement and discussion about what's going to happen with conferences. The SEC, I think, did the best thing that they could, and I agree with you. The autonomy, however many they're going to be, if it was at 1.60, 64, I don't know the number, but whatever that's going to look like, I would be shocked if Greg Sankey wasn't the leader of that and the guy that pulls that off because he knows how to do that, and he's already shown the ability to get consensus from folks that don't really want things to happen. A&M and Missouri were really not happy with that. But what can they do when they know their pocketbooks are going to only get fatter?
And I'll ask you this on top of that, as a guy from Texas that played in the Pac-12, well, Pac-10 back then.
Yeah.
I heard an opinion recently that essentially the Pac-12 would be smart to take some of those remaining Big 12 schools so that they can have noon games in the central time zone to bleed into their later game, their 3:30 window games, which 3:30 East Coast time, noon out there, right?
Yeah.
Somebody said that would make sense for the Pac-12 from an expansion standpoint. Do you buy that? And does that make sense? And even more so, as you know, would the people in Texas care?
Yeah, I think the people in Texas care. It's enough of a fan base in Texas to like what happens out west. Here's my only concern with that. Do you get the same cachet with Kansas State, Baylor, Texas Tech? I don't know. And that's why I'm concerned with the Pac-12, looking at them thinking, would it be more of a Big Ten affiliation where you take some of those teams like Washington, Oregon, UCLA, USC, maybe the Arizonas. I don't know the combination.
Mm-hmm.
Cal wouldn't want to be left out. So in the Big Ten and the Pac-12 or Pac-10 affiliation, to me, has always been one that's been pretty strong because that's where the Rose Bowl has always kind of pulled people from in normal years. I just don't know if it's enough with what's left over from the Big 12 to really give it to the bite or the thought that you need. And you've got a lot of smaller schools. I think TCU is another school that's looking at it like, man, we cannot get a break. Every time we move somewhere, I mean, we keep moving and not ending up in a place where we can call home. So, yeah, I think the Pac-12 fans would have liked to see ideally Texas and Oklahoma State. Yeah, maybe that might bring you a little bit of cachet, but without the Oklahoma, I don't know if it has the same bite. But I don't think Baylor and TCU, as good as they've been, will give you what you need when you're looking at a merger between those two conferences.
He is Charles Arbuckle. He can follow him on Twitter at Charles Arbuckle. Buck, thank you so much for coming on with us. It's been in a few minutes with us.
Hey, man, it was good talking to y'all. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate you, Buck. Take care, man.
All right. Take it easy.
One thing we talk about a lot with this transition to the SEC kind of mega conferences is football, but we forget that, Tennessee is a good basketball school. They're not really a football school anymore. As much as, as a Tennessee fan, they haven't been that good. You got to be honest with yourself. Baseball, Vanderbilt's a powerhouse. Mississippi State's a national champion. So there's a lot more that goes into this realignment than just football.
Well, yeah, and just real quick on that, one of the things that's been sort of bandied about, if you will, I haven't heard anything from necessarily the school or the conferences, Kansas and maybe a Big Ten alignment there. And one of the main reasons why the first thing you're thinking, right, is Kansas football's been horrendous. And they have been horrendous since they got rid of Mark Mangino, who, if people don't remember, him and that crew, Kerry Meyer and those guys, went down to the Orange Bowl and slapped Virginia Tech around pretty good. They were a physical football team back then. But their basketball program obviously is a powerhouse, a blue blood, a national brand, all those words that you want to use. But they're also one of the tops. Their athletic department was tops in fundraising across the nation last year. And so they're one to watch as well. But to your point, yeah, the SEC alignment, aligning with that league, bringing those brands in Texas and Oklahoma in, and also the Houston, Dallas, TV markets, Austin as well, obviously, is going to help expand the SEC footprint as well.
You know why I like you, Reg? Because you always seem to give me a nice thing to transition to. Because you mentioned Kansas. And, the Hornets, we've had a lot of changeover since last week. Speaking of Kansas, Devontae Graham, he's no longer here. He's went to New Orleans on a sign and trade, got 4 years, $47 million, which we spoke about last week. It's too much to pay for a backup point guard. Malik Monk has since left. He's on a 1 year deal with the Lakers. Ish Smith has been brought in, the Charlotte kid. We went to Central Cabarrus. He's now in the fold on a 1 year deal. Kelly Oubre He's going to come off the bench in a 2-year, $26 million deal. I love his nickname, by the way, Tsunami Poppy. That is amazing.
How good is that?
That's such
How
a good
is
nickname. And James Borrego is reportedly going to stick around for a little bit with a contract extension. Which one of those, out of all the news with the Hornets this past week, it kind of sticks out to you?
I think there's two things that jump out to me. Number one is James Borrego's contract extension, because to me that solidifies that the organization is happy with player development under him, and also the fact that he sees a future in this team being a winner, and this team continuing to improve. And then the other one, it really is Kelly Oubre, and the reason why is because if they have to go into some interesting situations with personnel. Think about a lineup like this with LaMelo on the floor alongside Terry with Gordon Hayward, Kelly Oubre, and then you can go PJ Washington at the 5. You can have Miles Bridges in there. If Gordon Hayward's not on the floor, with Oubre at the 4 and Bridges at the 3, you can do a lot of different things with some guys that can get up and down the floor. And obviously, Gordon Hayward's had his share of injuries. Now you can kind of work his minutes, and Bridges and Oubre and those guys at that 3-4 position, along with PJ. You can really finagle some minutes with those guys and keep them fresh for down the stretch of games. So, and Kelly Oubre can guard multiple positions. So I actually don't mind that signing. Obviously, he's a little cheaper than Devontae Graham,
and he can contribute offensively.
And he can contribute offensively. He can knock down shots every now and then if he gets a matchup situation, because Oubre's 6'8", 6'9", I believe. He gets a matchup situation, maybe you can throw it to him in the post. That's not your primary offense, but you can do it in some spots. So his versatility, I think, is going to be important for this basketball team. And
he's going to offset, the offensive contributions that you lost with Malik Monk going to Los Angeles.
Let me make a point about Malik Monk too, because I saw on Twitter a lot of folks were kind of upset that Malik Monk left here, and they felt like the organization was maybe being cheap because he only got a 1-year deal in LA. He wasn't taking a 1-year deal to stay here.
No,
he's taking a 1-year deal because it's the LA Lakers. If he can catch and shoot from LeBron and Westbrook for a year, someone is going to pay him upwards of $15, $20 million a year. I don't think that he had proven to be that valuable here, and he was not going to take a 1-year deal to remain in Charlotte. No. So don't be upset about Malik Monk going to the Lakers, Hornets fans.
And he's the youngest guy in the Lakers by far, now with LeBron and Carmelo and Russell. I mean, it's an old man party over there, but I hope Carmelo goes to win his ring. There's two names you didn't mention. James Bouknight and Kai Jones, who were the 2 Hornets first-round picks. And did you see the dunk Sunday in the Summer League from Kai Jones? My goodness.
Lift off. I mean, the young fella turned. What I love about that move the most, Kev, is he pump faked, right? There was a pump fake on the catch and shoot, which would have been a 3-point attempt. The pump fake, the turn, one dribble, elevate, not caring who's below. But what made it even more smooth was Kenneth Faried. Yes, I said Kenneth Faried, who was playing in the Summer League for Portland, tried to slide over and take the charge, and Jones kept soaring past him and was still able to finish. I thought that was an incredibly athletic move, but more than anything, it was aggressive and decisive, and you like to see that with young players. So I was encouraged by Kai Jones. Bouknight made a couple of nice plays. He was doing a lot of playmaking, but he did hit some shots, hit a step back to end the half as well. And he's one I think to keep an eye on, because if Bouknight plays well all year and they have to make a decision at the end of this season, and Terry Rozier is looking for a big number, a max type contract, and Bouknight's playing well, they may choose to move on from Terry, and Bouknight then would slide into that spot. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. But I thought the rookies looked pretty good on Sunday. And another one that looked pretty good is LiAngelo Ball. LaMelo, his older brother, was there to watch his older brother, right? LaMelo was in the building. LeVar was in the building as well. But LiAngelo, I thought, shot the ball really well. And I remember seeing LiAngelo play not only in high school, but a little bit when he was at UCLA, saw some film and different things. And what I saw on Sunday was a guy that appeared to be much more athletic than I remember. And he still shot the ball very well, which we knew he could do even coming out of high school and going into college. So good for him. I'm happy for him. I don't know that he makes this team because I think there are some roster issues in terms of how many guys have guaranteed contracts, but I thought he showed himself well.
You mentioned Terry, and we talked about it this week. You and I texted about this. Before I get into Terry, you're going to have LaMelo throwing the ball up to Miles. You're going to have LaMelo throwing the ball up to Kai Jones. It's going to be a show.
And book night.
But you have Miles. He's got 1 year left, and I think they have a qualifying offer out to him.
Mm-hmm.
He's affordable right now.
Mm-hmm.
Terry, I think the writing is kind of on the wall. And you mentioned this when you texted me about it this week. Book night's drafted. Maybe he is the heir apparent to that role. Terry's been great here in Charlotte, and I think he's going to have another great year coming up. But he's going to want to get paid, and rightfully so. And
Yep.
you said it last week. You said it last week on 7:30 The Game on your weekly appearance that Michael Jordan's not going to pay that luxury tax on a team that's not ready to win right now. So I think Terry. I think this is going to be his last year in Charlotte. If I had to pick one of the two between him and Miles, I'm going to pay Miles because he gives you that size at the four, and he could dunk, and he can play defense, and he can shoot, and he doesn't miss free throws. And you're going to want to save your money because if LaMelo's trajectory continues on this, pure Phoenix-like rise, you are going to have to pay him whatever he wants, whatever max deal he gets or he's entitled to, he is going to get because every team in the league is going to be after his services because he may not be the best point guard in the league right now, but he is going to be one day.
Well, and to that point, just so everybody has a little bit of some clarity on what that means by max contract, based on what we've seen this week, and I'm going to use Luka Doncic as the example, 5 years, $207 million. That's what LaMelo Ball is probably projecting toward trajectory-wise looking at.
Probably more
in a couple of years. The number keeps going up.
Yeah.
Right. And so people need to understand that you're talking about $40 million a year at that point. And so you have to be aware that that's going to be prohibitive if you want to keep Terry here and keep Miles here and keep some different guys. And for everybody that's saying, okay, trade Terry to go get a big man, the big man that everyone keeps talking about is Miles Turner in Indiana. Mm-hmm. The problem with Indiana is they got guards. They're not worried about guards. They have Karis LeVert and Malcolm Brogdon. They're not going to trade their big guy that can play with those guards for another guard in Terry Rozier. That just the math doesn't make sense. So for everybody that's clamoring for that trade to happen, that's what's slowing that process down if it ever even happens, because Indiana is looking at their roster saying, we've got Miles Turner, but if we're going to flip him, we're going to flip him for a pure wing player because they have Sabonis who can really play that 4 or 5, mainly the 5. And then they have their guards in LeVert and Malcolm Brogdon. If those guys can stay healthy, they've got 3 pieces of a really good basketball team. So trading Terry for Miles Turner, that's why that trade does not make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm looking forward to this Hornets season. It's going to be fun.
I think so too.
And next week when we talk, we're going to actually have a Panthers game to talk about. We've been doing this podcast for 6 months, Reggie. We're finally going to get a damn game to talk about.
Let's do it, man. It's going to be great to be able to talk some actual live bullets. And then just to let everybody know, the following week, the Panthers preseason game against the Ravens, I'm actually going to be in the building for that. So I'll give my opinion on that one as well. Obviously, after that game, I'll have a bird's eye view, if you will, of what happened during that preseason game to discuss this football team as well. So my grind has begun, my man. My grind has begun.
Beautiful. Well, we'll look forward to talking to you next week about the Panthers and the Colts. And I guess we'll see you next week.
Yeah, that'll be great, man. Looking forward to it. Always fun to hang out with you, my guy.
Yes, sir. As always. All right, we'll see y'all next week.
Later.